Good evening, my little creatures of the night. Mr. Wendigo back again with your late night creature feature. Before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you listening from tonight? Alone in your room? Driving through empty roads? Drop a comment and let me know. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now then, let's see what tonight's tale brings us. They left the meat, but took everything else. Look, I've pulled a lot of people out of the Wyoming backcountry. Hikers who underestimated the elevation, hunters who overestimated themselves. Once, a guy on a mountain bike who'd taken a trail from a YouTube video like that was a reasonable way to make decisions. I've pulled bodies too, not often, but enough that I stopped counting at some point around year 6. You do this job long enough, the number stops meaning something specific and starts meaning something general instead, something about what mountains think of people. I've been search and rescue out of the Bridger Teton office for 11 years. Before that, I did 4 years with Grand Teton Park Service, trail maintenance mostly. Which sounds boring until you factor in that I spent those 4 years learning every creek drainage and ridgeline in that range well enough to walk them blind. That's the job, not the rescues, the knowing. I got into SAR because of my sister. I was 12, she was 9. Family camping trip up near Togwotee Pass, middle of August, one of those Wyoming summer days where the sky is so blue it almost looks fake. She climbed a tree at the edge of our campsite after dinner while my dad was doing dishes and my mom was reading. I saw her go up. I remember thinking she was going pretty high. I didn't say anything. They never found her. I know how that sounds. I've had 22 years to sit with how that sounds, and it still doesn't sound like anything that should be true. Trees don't take people. That's not a thing that happens. Except it did, and every missing persons case I've worked since then is her, a little bit. And finding them is the thing I can do now that I couldn't do when I was 12 and standing at the base of an empty tree calling her name. That's the whole reason. That's all of it. I'm telling you this because of what the tree looked like when we found it. Up near the fork of the Gros Ventre, in the snow, 3 days into a backcountry search for 3 men I'd been getting homemade jerky from since I moved to Jackson. I'm telling you because the thing that was out there, whatever it was, it knew that about me. It had to have known. There's no other way to explain what it built. I'd swung by the Adams place the previous Thursday to pick up a jar of the elk jerky Fred always put up in October. His wife Donna answered the door. She had that look on her face that I've gotten good at reading over 11 years of this work, the one that sits somewhere between worried and not ready to say the word yet. They were supposed to be back yesterday, she said. Fred Adams was 55 years old, 3rd generation Wyoming. Big guy, gone soft around the middle the way guys do when they hit their 50s, but still stronger than most men half his age, the kind of strong that comes from a lifetime of real work. He ran a small outfitting operation out of the back of his property, guided elk and mule deer hunts from September through November every year, and he made elk jerky in the fall that I would have driven 4 hours for. He also, now and then, hunted spots that were a little outside his permitted zone, which everyone in the Bridger Teton office knew and nobody said much about because Fred Adams was the kind of man who left the land better than he found it. The paperwork just hadn't caught up to his ethics yet. His brother Dale was 60, quiet where Fred was loud, careful where Fred was instinctive. Dale was the one who'd read the weather and read the terrain and say the thing nobody wanted to hear and be right 90% of the time. He'd been hunting that country for 40 years. He knew the Gros Ventre drainage the way I knew the layout of my own apartment. Their father, Roy Adams, was 72 years old and still hunting the same creek bottom he'd first hunted in 1971. Lean, deliberate, the kind of old that isn't frail so much as condensed. Roy didn't talk much. When he did, it was worth writing down. He still packed out his own elk, which I know because Fred complained about it every year, and Roy still shot better than both his sons, which Fred also complained about. 3 generations of Adams men who knew the Gros Ventre backcountry better than most rangers I've worked with. They were a day overdue. I asked Donna if she'd call the office. She said she didn't want to make a fuss. I told her it wasn't a fuss. I told her I'd look into it. She handed me the jerky jar anyway, which I took, because refusing Donna Adams's elk jerky wasn't something a reasonable person did. I went back to the office and pulled the file in their usual camp area, 15 miles in, creek drainage off the south fork of the Gros Ventre, elevation just over 8,000 feet. Snow on the ground already, more coming by the weekend. The temperature had been dropping all week, the steady kind of drop that means business. My rookie was on rotation, Sammy Stockton, 24 years old, 8 months in, grew up in Cheyenne, went to school in Laramie, got hired in February and had spent the spring and summer learning that everything he'd studied in the classroom was correct in theory and somewhat beside the point in practice. Good instincts, quick on his feet. Weak stomach, which I'd been meaning to work on with him but hadn't gotten around to yet. I told him to gear up for a 2-day push, possibly 3. He asked if I thought the Adams men were okay. I thought about Fred with his off-the-books permits and his elk jerky, Dale with his weather eye. Roy Adams, 72 years old, who I'd once watched walk 12 miles back to the trailhead in the dark because he didn't want to camp in a spot that felt wrong to him. He hadn't explained it beyond that. It felt wrong. He'd walked out. I'd thought about that more than once since. They're fine, I told Sammy. Let's go make sure. I believed it when I said it. We made good time the first day. The snow on the trail was maybe 4 inches, light and dry, easy to move through. Sammy set a decent pace and didn't complain, which I noted. The mountains were doing what Wyoming mountains do in late October, which is look beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with you and doesn't care whether you notice. We talked some on the way in. That's just how it goes on a long trail. You either talk or you go inside your head, and Sammy wasn't the type to go inside his head for 15 miles, which is fine. I'm not either. He asked me how many searches I'd run. More than I've counted, I said. What's the percentage, finding them okay versus... Depends on the job. Day hikers, almost always okay. Hunters this time of year, usually okay. They've got gear, they've got food, they know how to bivouac. And when they're not okay, then we find them and bring them home anyway, I said. That's still the job. He was quiet for a bit after that. The trail curved up through a stand of lodgepole pine and the snow got a little deeper in the shadow of the trees. A Clark's nutcracker went off somewhere above us, loud and irritated about something. Normal sound, good sound. You know the Adams family well? He asked. Well enough. Fred brings jerky to the office every October. Roy told me once that the South Fork drainage we're heading into holds the biggest mule deer he's ever seen. Said it like it was a secret and like he didn't care who knew it. Sammy smiled at that. Dale's the serious one, I said. If Dale Adams is a day overdue, there's a reason. Good reason or bad reason? I didn't answer that. We kept moving. We made camp that night about 9 miles in, well short of the Adams spot, because pushing 15 miles in late afternoon snow with a rookie wasn't something I was going to do. We set up quick, ate, kept the fire small. Sammy asked if I'd done many winter searches. Enough, I said. Creepy out here at night. Mountains are creepy at night. That's normal. He looked out at the tree line. The dark beyond the fire was absolute, the way backcountry dark always is once you get far enough from everything. No ambient light. No sound but the fire and the wind moving through the pines above us. Still, he said, get some sleep, Sammy. He did. I sat up another hour and watched the fire and didn't think about anything specific and eventually turned in. Nothing happened that night. I want to be clear about that. The first night was just the mountains. We reached the Adams camp just before noon the next day. I smelled it before I saw it. Not rot, just the particular smell of a camp that's been sitting for a few days. Cold ash and canvas and the sharp iron smell of field-dressed meat hanging in cold air. The tent was first. Or what was left of it. It hadn't been knocked over or collapsed. It had been opened. That's the only word that fits. like something had decided it wanted to see what was inside and used both hands and just pulled. The fabric was in 3 or 4 large pieces laid out in a rough circle around the tent poles, which were still standing, bent now but upright. The sleeping bags were there, still inside their stuff sacks. The camp stove, a paperback novel face down in the snow, Roy's reading glasses folded on top of it. The gear was untouched. Everything exactly where it had been left, except the tent around it was gone. Sammy stood next to me looking at it. "What does that?" he said. I didn't answer right away. I was looking at the hanging line strung between 2 lodge poles at the edge of camp. A mule deer hung from it, field-dressed, opened and clean, the body cavity empty and dark. Good shot placement, good field work. 3 days hanging in cold air, this temperature, it would still be fine, maybe better than fine. Whatever had torn the tent apart had not touched the deer. I stood there looking at the hanging deer and the ruined tent for a long time. "What does that and doesn't touch the meat?" Sammy said quietly, more to himself than to me. I loaded 3 rounds into my rifle and shouldered it. "Stay close," I said. "Watch where you step. I want to see if there are tracks." There were tracks, 2 sets going out of camp heading north along the creek drainage, 1 set older and fainter, heading the same direction. They'd left at different times, or the 3rd man had gone ahead. The snow told the story in the way snow always does, patient and specific, if you know how to read it. We followed the first set. I've seen a lot of things in 11 years of search and rescue. I want to say that clearly before I describe what we found, because I think it matters that you understand I am not someone who rattles easy. I have recovered drowning victims in spring runoff. I have worked a climbing accident on the north face of the Grand where the fall was long enough that identification required dental records. I have sat with families and told them things that changed their lives in the space of a sentence. I do not rattle easy. The first body was about a 1/4 mile from camp, where the creek drainage bent west and a single big Douglas fir stood at the edge of a small clearing, its lowest branches maybe 12 feet off the ground. It was Fred. The boots gave him away, custom whites, resold twice, the kind of boots a man spends real money on and then wears for 20 years. I knew those boots. I'd seen them under the kitchen table at the Adams place drinking Donna's coffee. The rest of him was in the tree. His head was at the top, sitting up there like the point of something, facing out over the clearing, eyes open. I will not describe the expression. Some things you file away in the part of yourself where the bad things go that you're not ready to look at directly, and you leave them there, and you do your job. His arms were on the branches below, 1 per branch, arranged outward and slightly upward, reaching or welcoming something down. The skin of his forearms had split in the cold, the edges clean, no tearing, and the split ran from wrist to elbow on both sides, opened and laid back like someone had been looking for something inside. His rib cage was 6 feet up, wrapped around the trunk. Pressed flat into the bark, the ribs spread wide and locked around the wood like a set of hands that had been gripping something long enough to forget how to let go. The cavity was cleaned out, empty. You could see the column of the spine still inside, the only thing left, and it was straight and white and precise. The smell was cold iron and pine sap and something sweet underneath that I associated with field dressing and tried not to think about too hard at this elevation in late October. The tree had already started to grow into it. 3 days. The bark at the edges of the ribs had begun to close over the bone, soft new growth pressing in at the margins, the wood accepting the shape of him the way wood accepts a nail if you give it enough time. 3 days. That should not have been possible. I stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at it for a long time. The clearing was silent in a way that clearings aren't. No wind moving through it, no birds. Just the tree and what had been made of Fred Adams and the specific sound of nothing where something should be. Sammy made it about 4 steps into the clearing before he went to 1 knee in the snow. I heard him behind me. I didn't turn around. I gave him a minute. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be." He got back to his feet. I could hear him breathing through his mouth, slow and deliberate, working to stay level. 8 months in and he was doing better than most veterans would have. I noted that too. I looked at the tree, at the arrangement of it, at the care of it, because that was the word. Whoever had done this, whatever had done this, had taken time, had thought about it. My sister had been 9 years old and she had climbed a tree and disappeared. They found her shoe 2 years later. An old ranger working a drainage 200 miles south, down near the Colorado border, doing late-season trail maintenance in country nobody much used anymore. He found it sitting in the middle of the path. Just sitting there. One shoe, size 4, pink canvas with a Velcro strap. My mother had bought 2 pairs of them that summer because my sister went through shoes fast. It looked brand new. That's what the ranger said in his report, and what the sheriff told my parents, and what I read myself years later when I was old enough to pull the file. Brand new. Not a speck of dirt on it, no weather damage, no fading, like someone had taken it off carefully and set it down clean and walked away, like wherever she had been for 2 years. They kept things clean. I looked away from the top of the Douglas fir and studied the clearing instead. He'd want to be found, I said. His family needs to know where he is. We're going to mark the location, document what we can, and keep moving. Dale and Roy are still out there. Sammy nodded. He had his locator out already, hands steady. Good kid. We marked the location and kept moving. By 4 in the afternoon, the light was going, and the snow had picked up. Not heavy, but steady, and I made the call to set up camp. We were another 1.5 miles up the drainage, far enough from the clearing that I could think straight, close enough to the second creek fork that we'd have water in the morning. Sammy built the fire. He was quiet in the way people get quiet when something has reorganized their understanding of the world and they haven't caught up to it yet. I let him be quiet. I made coffee and handed him a cup, and he took it without saying anything. We ate. Trail food, nothing special. The elk jerky from Donna Adams's kitchen was in my pack, and I did not take it out. After a while, Sammy said, "What does something like that?" "I don't know. The bear population up here, could a bear?" "No." He went quiet again. The fire popped. Wind moved through the pines above us, that low, sustained sound that the mountains make when they're breathing. "Then what?" he said. "I don't know yet. Let's find Dale and Roy and get everyone home and figure out the rest after." He stared into the fire. "The rib cage," he said. "Around the tree. It had already started growing into it." "I know." "That's not possible. 3 days." "I know." He looked at me. "You're not surprised?" I took a sip of coffee. I've been on cases up in this drainage before. Not like this, but I've been on cases. And I've heard stories from the old-timers that I filed away and tried not to think about too hard. "What kind of stories?" The wind shifted. The fire leaned sideways for a second and then straightened. Somewhere in the dark above the creek, I heard something move through snow. 1 step, 2 steps, then nothing. Deer, probably, or not. "Go to sleep, Sammy," I said. He didn't. Not for a long time. Neither did I. It started around midnight. Not loud. That's the thing I want you to understand. It wasn't designed to be loud. It was designed to be just clear enough that you couldn't tell yourself it was the wind. Children laughing. Somewhere out in the dark, past the tree line, off to the north, the sound of kids laughing the way kids laugh when they're playing a game and somebody's winning. High and bright and completely wrong at 8,000 feet in the snow at midnight in late October in the Gros Ventre wilderness, 15 miles from the nearest road. Sammy sat up in his sleeping bag. I was already awake. The laughing moved. That was the part that worked on you. It didn't come from one spot. It drifted, like whoever was making it was walking a slow circle around our camp, just outside the firelight, just past where you could see. Then it stopped. Silence for maybe 90 seconds. Then the elk called. A bull elk bugle carries a long way in mountain air. You can hear them from a mile off sometimes in the rut, that high rising scream that drops into a series of grunts at the end. I've heard thousands of them. You work this country long enough, The sound gets into your bones and you don't even really hear it anymore, same way you stop hearing traffic if you live near a highway. What came out of the dark north of our camp was not that. It was the shape of an elk bugle, the same notes, the same rising and falling, but played backwards, or slowed, or both. Like someone had recorded the call and run it through something that turned it inside out. Every note was there and every note was wrong, the way a word in your own language sounds wrong when you say it too many times in a row until it stops meaning anything. It went on for about 30 seconds. Then silence again. Sammy was sitting completely still. I could see his face in the firelight. He was holding it together. Barely, but he was holding it. "Nicky, I hear it." "What is that?" "Don't give it your attention. Don't turn toward it. Look at the fire." "What?" "Look at the fire, Sammy. The more you focus on it, the more you feed it. These things, whatever they are, they want your attention. That's the point. Don't give it." He looked at the fire. His jaw was tight. He was doing the breathing thing again, slow and deliberate, working to stay level. Good. The laughing started again. Closer this time. Maybe 50 yards. "What is it?" he said, voice low and flat. "Just tell me quick. I don't want to know, but I need to know." "The old-timers don't have a name for it," I said, keeping my voice even, eyes on the fire. Not one word anyway. "The locals, the people who've been in these mountains a long time, they talk about things. Human-shaped, but not human. Tall, very tall, 15 feet or better. They wear skins. Multiple skins, different animals layered over each other. And they always have antlers. Doesn't matter what animal skin they're wearing, always antlers." Sammy said nothing. Similar to skinwalker lore, some of the accounts. But these aren't skinwalkers. Skinwalkers are one skin. These things layer them, and they're bigger, and they play games. Games. That's what the stories say. They like the attention. They like the fear. Getting you alone is the point. Getting you separated. Getting you to do something stupid in the dark. The laughing, the sounds, that's the game. Stay by the fire, don't react, don't separate, and usually they move on. "Usually," Sammy said. "Usually." The backwards elk call came again, farther away now, drifting south. Then the laughter, distant, drifting south, fading. Then nothing. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. We sat by the fire and fed it when it needed feeding and watched the dark and didn't talk much and waited for the sky to go from black to gray. It did, eventually. It always does. We were moving by first light. Sammy had dark circles and a quietness about him that was different from the quiet of the night before, that had been processing. This was something that had finished processing and landed somewhere harder. We made coffee first. I had a system for cold morning starts in the field, had worked it out over 11 years of early departures, and the system involved coffee before conversation and food before decisions. I handed Sammy a cup and he wrapped both hands around it and stared into the middle distance. After a while, he said, "We're going to find Dale and Roy. That's the plan. And then we're going to get out." "Correct." He drank his coffee. I ate a handful of trail mix and reloaded my rifle and broke camp in the order I always break camp, methodical, nothing left behind. Sammy watched me do it and then did the same with his own gear, matching the rhythm. Before we started moving, he stepped off the trail for a minute. Basic human need, nothing to discuss. I did the same, on the other side of a lodgepole, and looked up at the sky while I was at it. Gray, low, more snow coming. The temperature had dropped overnight, that deep bone cold that's different from just cold, the kind that means business. By 8 we were moving. The tracks were still readable, the overnight snow hadn't buried them completely, and by mid-morning we'd picked up the second set going northeast toward the upper lake. Dale's tracks, based on the boot size and the stride, Roy's were somewhere ahead, older, harder to make out. The morning was quiet in the way mornings after something wrong are quiet. The forest doing its normal things, birds moving, Wind in the high timber, the creek running somewhere below us under its shelf of new ice, normal. I stayed focused on the tracks and kept Sammy close and didn't let my mind go to the tree in the clearing. Didn't always work. Around mid-morning, Sammy stopped. I noticed when the sound of his footsteps behind me stopped and I turned. He was looking off into the timber to the east. His head was slightly tilted. His hand was on his rifle stock, but he hadn't raised it. What? I saw something. He kept looking at the tree line. Movement. Deer, probably. Fox. Coyote. Yeah. He paused. It was big, though. Dark. Bear? Maybe. He still hadn't looked away from the trees. Maybe a bear. I waited. But it had antlers. He finally looked at me. I held his eyes for a second. Then I turned back to the trail, rolled my shoulders, and unslung my rifle. I loaded 3 rounds and kept it in my hands. Okay, I said. Keep moving. Keep your mouth shut and keep moving. He fell in behind me and we kept moving. We found Dale Adams just before 2 in the afternoon. Up near where the creek widened into a shallow lake, the water mostly frozen now, the ice gray and new and not yet trustworthy. There was a boulder at the edge of the ice, big granite thing, flat on top, the kind of rock that in summer would have made a good place to sit and eat lunch. Dale's skin was on the boulder. I mean that the way it sounds. His skin, complete, intact. Face, hands, everything down to the fingernail still in place, the whorls of his fingerprints visible if you looked close enough, which I did not. No tearing, no rough edges. The removal had been done with a precision that had nothing to do with anything I wanted to think about. The seams opened and closed cleanly. The whole thing laid out flat across the top of the granite like a garment someone had folded at the end of a long day. Face up, arms out, palms open. No blood on the rock. That was the part that took a moment to process. A job like that, at that scale, should have left blood on the granite. There was none. The skin itself, where it had been separated, showed edges that were clean and dry, like it had been done somewhere else and brought here, presented here. The face was intact, the features recognizable, and I recognized them, and I looked away from the face and looked at the hands instead, and then I looked away from the hands too. And the flowers. Wild flowers, which should not have existed at this elevation in late October in the snow. Columbine and paintbrush and something purple I didn't have a name for, placed around the skin in a loose border, tucked under the edges, woven into the empty hands. Some of them were pressed flat against the skin. Some were standing upright in the snow around the base of the boulder. Like a kid showing you a drawing he'd done. Look what I made. Sammy made a sound. I couldn't tell if it was a laugh or something else. He said, "Are those flowers?" Yes. In October. Yes. He stood next to me and we both looked at it, the frozen lake behind it, the snowfield above, the gray sky pushing down on everything. Where did they even come from? I don't know. Dale Adams, he said. Not a question. He'd been on the route with me. He'd done the math. Yeah? A long pause. Then, very quietly, "At least he's got a nice view." I looked at him. He looked at me. Neither of us said anything else. It wasn't funny. It also wasn't not funny. That's where you go when the world stops making sense. You go sideways, and going sideways keeps you moving when moving is the only option. I noted the location. I documented what I could. I did not touch anything. Sammy. Yeah? Roy's still out there. He straightened up, reset himself. Good kid. Yeah, he said. Okay, let's go. By 4 in the afternoon we had a problem, which was that the light was going again and the clouds on the western horizon had the particular look of serious snow, the heavy low kind that moves fast and drops hard, and we hadn't found Roy Adams and we weren't going to find him in the dark. We set up camp on the far side of the lake, in the timber where we'd have some wind protection, better camp than the night before, more sheltered, cleaner sight lines. I built the fire bigger. Not huge, but bigger, enough that the light reached into the trees around us a good 20 feet in every direction. Sammy watched me build it. Bigger fire helps. I don't know if it helps, but it doesn't hurt, and I want to see what's out there. He sat down on his pack. He had his rifle across his knees. His face in the firelight was pale but steady, and I thought again that he was doing better than most would have done. Better than I might have done 11 years ago, before I learned the particular skill of not letting the bad things land until you've got somewhere safe to put them down. The kid had something. We ate and didn't talk much, and I packed a wad of chew into my lip and watched the dark between the trees. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. The new snow started around 6, soft and quiet, no wind behind it yet. Around 8, the sound started. Different from the night before. The night before had been designed to frighten, children laughing, the backwards call, the circling. Pure psychological pressure coming at you from all sides, working on the part of your brain that can't talk itself out of fear, the old part, the part that knows what dark is for. This was something else. It started as sound, just sound, coming from the north edge of the tree line, maybe 20 yards out. 2 deer. That was the first impression. 2 deer moving through the snow, the particular cadence of it, hooves in powder. Then they slowed, then they stopped, then they started making sounds. I've been in the mountains my whole adult life. I know what deer sound like. They bleat, they snort. They make a kind of low social sound when they're comfortable with each other, a murmur almost, that you can hear if you're close and the wind is right. What came from the tree line was not that. It was the shape of it, the rhythm and cadence of 2 animals communicating, back and forth, responsive, the way a conversation works. But the sounds were wrong in a way I can't fully explain, the way the elk call had been wrong the night before, except worse. Because these weren't quite animal sounds and they weren't quite human sounds, and they landed somewhere in between that your brain doesn't have a category for. You could almost hear words. Not words you could make out, not language you could recognize, but the structure of language, the rise and fall of meaning, 2 voices going back and forth. And behind it the sound of something that wasn't quite a deer making noises that weren't quite speech. The uncanny valley, that's the term. The zone where something is almost right and the almost is the worst part. 20 yards, moving slow, first from the north, then from the west. Both at once, and then a third from the east, and I couldn't tell anymore if it was 3 deer or 3 of whatever was wearing the deer. But it was surrounding the camp in a loose circle and making those sounds that I was not going to let myself try to interpret. Sammy had gone completely still. I took out my flashlight, heavy mag light, the kind that throws a real beam. I panned it slowly across the north tree line. The first thing I saw was a hindquarter, just the back end of something, pale in the beam, pressed against the far side of a big lodgepole 30 feet out, too big for a deer, too pale. The proportion was wrong, the leg too long, the joint bending at an angle that a deer's leg doesn't bend. I raised my rifle. I shot twice. The first round hit the tree, the second hit something behind it. The sound it made was not the sound of an animal, not the clean sound of a struck deer or elk. It was a sound that started low and built, a tearing, sustained scream that peaked somewhere above the range where sound should be able to go, and both Sammy and I felt it in our ears at the same moment. A sharp interior pressure, and I reached up and my fingers came back with a small amount of blood. Not much. Enough. The sound cut off. The silence after it was total. I panned the flashlight across the tree line. Nothing at the first tree. I moved the beam left, slow, until I found the gap between 2 big pines, and there it was. Not quite hidden, standing behind one of the pines with its face turned toward us, leaning slightly around the trunk, looking at us the way you look at something you've decided you're not done with yet. The beam caught it full on, and it didn't flinch and it didn't run. 15 feet tall, maybe more, pale, The kind of pale that has nothing to do with color and everything to do with the absence of something that living things have. The skin, if it was skin, hung wrong, loose in places, stretched in others, the way clothes look on someone they don't belong to. On its head, starting somewhere around the shoulder blades and rising up, a massive rack. The antlers were dark and wide, and the velvet was still on them, if you could call it velvet, because what was hanging from them was not velvet, and I was not going to look at it long enough to know what it was. Something dark was moving down its body, slow, coating the pale in black that didn't reflect the flashlight beam the way water should. Its eyes were white, no pupil, no iris, just white, with that depth behind them, that specific depth of something paying attention, that sense of something behind the eyes doing its own calculations. It looked at me. I looked at it. I moved the tobacco in my lip with my tongue, repositioned it to the other cheek, and spit into the snow. Then I raised my rifle and put the sight on its chest. It watched me do all of that. Then it pushed back from the pine tree, deliberate, no hurry, and moved into the dark behind the tree line. 1 step, 2 steps, and the night took it. The sound stopped. The deer conversation stopped. Everything stopped. Sammy exhaled next to me. It sounded like he'd been holding his breath since I fired. "You spit at it," he said. "Force of habit. You spit chew at a 15-foot monster. Did it work?" He thought about that. It left. Force of habit. I lowered the rifle and looked at the tree line a long time. The snow had picked up. The fire had burned down while I wasn't paying attention, and I added wood to it without taking my eyes off the dark. "We're not sleeping." "No," I agreed. "We're not sleeping." We didn't sleep. The third morning came the way the second had. Slow, gray. The snow overnight had added another 2 inches on top of what was already there, and the temperature at first light was low enough that my water bottle had a skin of ice on the inside of the cap. I broke camp by feel mostly, hands knowing what to do without being asked, which is what 11 years of this work gets you. Sammy was already up when I started moving, sitting on his pack with his rifle across his knees, looking at the tree line. He'd been in that position for a while from the look of it. He hadn't slept. Neither had I. That was 2 nights now. I got the stove going and made coffee and handed him a cup, and he took it and wrapped both hands around it and didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he said, "Is it still out there?" "Probably. Doesn't matter. We're moving." He looked at me over the cup. "Doesn't matter. We've got a job. Roy Adams is out there somewhere. We finished the job." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if Roy Adams is already?" "Then we find him and bring him home, same as Fred, same as Dale. That's still the job." He nodded, drank his coffee. Behind a lodgepole about 30 feet off, Sammy stepped away from camp for a minute. Basic human need. I did the same on the other side of a big spruce, looking up at the sky while I was at it. Low and gray and close, more snow by afternoon. The clouds had that flat-iron look that meant business. By 7, we were moving. Roy's tracks were almost gone under the new snow, but not quite. The stride was distinctive once you knew it, narrow and deliberate, each footfall placed with care. 72 years old, and he moved through this country like he belonged to it, which he did, which maybe was the problem. The tracks went northeast, past the lake, into timber I hadn't worked before. Steeper up here, rockier, the trees thinning as we gained elevation. The creek sound faded behind us. The wind picked up out of the northwest, that cutting high country wind that gets into your gear and stays there. We moved in silence mostly. What was there to say? The mountain was doing what mountains do in late October, which is remind you in every possible way that you are a temporary guest and the terms of the visit are not yours to set. I kept my rifle in my hands and my eyes on the tracks and my mind on the job and not on the tree line to either side, which was its own kind of discipline. Around mid-morning, the tracks changed. Not the stride, not the direction, something else. The spacing between footfalls got shorter, which on Roy Adams meant he'd slowed down. A man who's hiked his whole life slows down for 2 reasons. The terrain's gotten harder, or he's seen something. The terrain hadn't gotten harder. I slowed too, and Sammy fell in tighter behind me without being told. The tracks led us around a granite outcropping and down a short slope and then stopped. Not like he'd turned around, not like he'd backtracked. They just stopped, mid-stride, one foot in the snow and then nothing, like Roy Adams had taken a step and the next step had been somewhere else entirely. I stood at the last track and looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked up. We were at the edge of a clearing. It was maybe 100 feet across, almost perfectly circular, which is not something clearings in mountain timber are. Trees don't arrange themselves in circles. Rocks don't clear themselves in circles. This one was, though, a near-perfect ring of open ground surrounded by a wall of pine and spruce that stopped at the clearing's edge like they'd been told to. The snow in the clearing was thinner than it should have been, given what had fallen overnight. The clearing had its own weather. The snow barely wanted to land there. And the flowers. Same as Dale's boulder. Wild flowers in October at 8,000 feet, arranged in loose clusters across the clearing floor. Columbine and paintbrush, and the purple ones I still didn't have a name for, pressing up through the thin snow in patches, some of them frost-damaged and wilting, some of them perfectly fresh, like they'd opened that morning. The clearing was full of them. I stood at the edge and looked at it. Roy Adams's tracks ended at my feet, no tracks in the clearing, no sign he'd gone in. He'd just stopped at the edge, one last footfall, and then nothing. Sammy came up beside me and looked at it. Where is he? I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer that was going to help either of us. I looked at the flowers, at the thin snow, at the absolute stillness of the clearing, which didn't match the wind that was moving through the timber around us. The trees were swaying. The clearing wasn't. Whatever was in there was holding its breath. I looked at the edge of it. The tree line was sharp, the way tree lines are when the trees are arranged rather than grown. The pines and spruce on the south side were big, old growth, the kind that take 200 years to get that size. They stopped at the clearing's edge in a clean line, no saplings, no deadfall, nothing encroaching. The ground between the last tree and the clearing's edge was bare soil, no snow, no grass, just bare dark earth in a ring 6 inches wide going all the way around. Maintained, not natural. I thought about Roy Adams telling me once that the South Fork drainage held the biggest mule deer he'd ever seen. Said it quietly, said it like he'd earned the right to know it. 72 years in this country and it still surprised him sometimes. That had been over coffee at his kitchen table and his wife had been doing something at the counter and Fred had been saying something stupid in the next room and it had been, I realize now, a perfect and ordinary afternoon in a life that was full of them. His tracks ended at my feet. I stepped into the clearing. The ground under the snow was soft, too soft for this time of year, for this temperature, the thawed looseness of April, not October. Something underneath was warmer than it should be. My boots sank in a little more than they should have, and I noticed it, and I kept moving anyway because the job was the job, and Roy Adams's tracks had ended here, and I was going to find what there was to find. The smell came up with each step. Not bad, exactly. Not rot. Something older than rot. Underneath the cold and the pine, a faint green smell, growing things in the dark, the breath of something that had been closed for a long time and just opened. I noticed it, and I filed it, and I kept moving. I crossed the clearing toward the center. The flowers were everywhere underfoot, bright and wrong and too alive, their colors more saturated than they had any right to be this late in the year, the orange of the paintbrush almost orange-red, the columbine purple so deep it was almost blue. The stillness held. No wind in here, no sound from the creek, no birds. Just the soft sound of my boots in the snow and Sammy's footsteps behind me. The center of the clearing was empty. No tracks, no disturbance, just the flowers and the ground that was too soft and the silence. I stopped, turned in a slow circle, the tree line all around, even and clean, the bare earth border, the sky above, flat and gray and offering nothing. I had the feeling, sudden and total, of being watched from directly above, not from the trees, from above. I looked up at the gray sky and there was nothing there, and I looked back down and kept moving. I'd made it about 60 feet in when I heard him yelp. Not a scream, a yelp, short and sharp, the sound a person makes when something unexpected happens, when the ground gives way or a branch snaps back, the sound of surprise before the sound of fear. I turned. Sammy was gone. I mean that the way it sounds. I turned and Sammy Stockton, 24 years old, 8 months into the job, who had been 4 feet behind me a second ago, was not there. His tracks were there, coming from the tree line, crossing the clearing behind mine. They just stopped. Mid-stride, both feet in the snow and then nothing. Same as Roy's, same as that one last footfall that went somewhere I couldn't follow. I stood in the center of the clearing and looked at the place where his tracks ended. Sammy. Nothing. Sammy. The clearing was completely silent. The flowers around my boots looked up at me and I looked back at them, and neither of us had anything useful to say. I turned in a slow circle, the tree line at the clearing's edge, the thin snow, the flowers. The stillness that wasn't wind or weather, that was something else, something that pressed on the ears the way pressure changes press on the ears, a fullness that wasn't sound. 45 seconds, maybe a minute. The backpack came down about 10 feet to my left. It hit the snow and bounced once and came to rest on its side, Sammy's pack. I knew it by the red duct tape he'd put on the left shoulder strap, his system for telling his gear from anyone else's at a distance. The pack was intact, nothing broken, nothing torn. Just a pack that had come from somewhere above me in a clearing with no trees and landed in the snow at my feet. I looked up. Gray sky, flat and low and empty. I looked at the pack. I looked at the sky again. Then I picked up my rifle and I walked to the tree line, and I did not look back and I did not stop. Here is what I remember about the next 24 hours. I remember the first mile because I was still thinking clearly, running the exit route in my head, the trail back the way we'd come, 15 miles, the landmarks I'd noted on the way in, the creek crossings, the ridgeline that would orient me if the snow got heavy enough to cut visibility. I was thinking like a ranger, making the plan, working the problem. I remember that by the third mile I had stopped thinking like a ranger and started thinking like something older than that. Something that just understood that it needed to be somewhere else and was not going to stop until it got there. I did not look at the things in the trees. They were there, both sides, flanking me, 20 or 30 yards out, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. I could hear them in the timber, that sound that almost wasn't a sound, the weight of something large moving through snow in a way that doesn't match any animal you know, not crashing, not stumbling, deliberate, paced, like something that had walked alongside frightened people before and knew exactly how much distance to keep to be useful, close enough to hear, far enough that looking would feel like a choice. I did not give them my attention. That was the whole discipline. 11 years in this country, and the stories from the old-timers and the 2 nights of camp sounds and what I'd seen in the flashlight beam, all of it came down to this one thing. Do not look. Do not acknowledge. Do not let them know that they're landing. Keep your eyes on the trail and your mind on the next landmark and move. The 15 miles between you and the trailhead. That's the only thing that exists in the world. It is the hardest thing I have ever done. Not because I was scared, though I was. Not because I was tired, though 2 nights without sleep and 15 miles at elevation in the snow will do specific things to your body that don't show up until later. When you're safe and your legs decide to file their complaint all at once, it was hard for a different reason. The kind of hard that gets into the reasoning part of your brain and starts making arguments. Mile 4 or 5, I started hearing the snow wrong. My own footsteps sounded too loud, too deliberate. Something was matching the rhythm of them, a half beat behind, and I would find myself slowing down to check, and the sound would slow too, and I'd speed up, and it would speed up. And I understood that was the point of it, and I kept moving. The trail crossed the creek at a ford I'd noted coming in. the ice not thick enough yet to trust, and I went through the water without stopping, knee-deep and fast-moving. Cold enough that my legs went numb from the knee down for the next half-mile. That was fine. Numb was functional. Numb kept moving. It was hard because at mile 7 or 8, somewhere in the section where the trail dropped through the big lodgepole stand and ran alongside the frozen creek, I heard Sammy's voice. In the trees, to my left, 20 yards off. His voice, his specific voice, the pitch and cadence of it, the way he said my name, Nicky, 2 syllables. The way he always said it, slightly flat on the second one, the way Cheyenne boys say names. Nicky, hey, Nicky, wait. I did not look. Nicky, I'm right here. Nicky, it's fine, I'm okay, just slow down. I did not look. Nicky. The voice moved with me, kept pace with me. Sammy's voice coming from the timber to my left, easy and calm, like we'd just gotten separated in the trees and he was trying to catch up, like everything was fine, like none of this had happened. The pack, the clearing, the tracks that stopped mid-stride. I kept my eyes on the trail. I counted my steps instead of listening. 1, 2, 3, 4. Every step forward a number, filling my head with numbers so there was no room for what was coming out of the trees. It is a technique I had heard about but never needed before. It worked, more or less, the way a tourniquet works. Not comfortable, functional. What made it hardest was that it was good. The voice was good. Not quite perfect. There was something off about the pauses, the way it handled silence between words, like it was working from a recording and didn't know what silence was for, but close. Close enough that some part of me, the part that had worked alongside Sammy Stockton for 8 months and eaten trail food next to him and watched him hold himself together over 2 nights that would have broken most people, that part wanted to look. I did not look. After a while, the voice changed. Still Sammy's voice, but the words stopped making sense. Became syllables that almost assembled into words and then didn't. Then it wasn't quite Sammy's voice. It was the shape of it, the tone and register, but running at the wrong speed, too slow and then too fast. Then it was just sound. Then it was nothing. By mile 12, the things in the trees had dropped back. I couldn't hear them anymore. The snow had picked up and the visibility was down to maybe 40 feet and the trail was mostly instinct at that point. My feet knowing the way, even when my eyes couldn't confirm it. I stopped once to drink water, hands shaking enough that I spilled some, and I didn't stop again. The trailhead parking lot came out of the snow like a rumor, the truck sitting where I'd left it 3 days ago, covered in 8 inches of new snow, the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I stood at the edge of the lot for a second and looked at it. I didn't look back at the trail. I got in the truck and I drove. I pulled into the station at 11:47 at night. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock on the dashboard when I parked and I noted it the way you note irrelevant details when your brain is running on nothing and trying to hold on to something solid. 11:47, Monday night, the station parking lot, the light over the back door, the familiar shape of the building I had worked in for 11 years. I sat in the truck for a while. Not long. Maybe 5 minutes. Then I went inside. The station was empty, which I'd expected. I was supposed to have checked in that afternoon and hadn't. There would be messages. There would be calls. There would be things that needed handling, reports and notifications and the beginning of the process that follows when a search goes wrong. When you come out of the backcountry alone with nothing to show but coordinates of locations I was going to have nightmares about. That was tomorrow. Tonight I got the bottle of Wyoming whiskey out of the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I kept for the end of bad searches, and I poured 4 fingers into a coffee mug and I turned on the radio. Classic country station out of Jackson, something from the 90s, I don't remember what. It didn't matter. It was sound that came from a world where things were normal and I needed to be near that, even at one remove. I sat in my desk chair and I drank. The first finger went fast. The second slowed down. My body was registering what I'd put it through, 15 miles in a day, 2 nights without sleep, and the specific physical weight of carrying bad information for 3 days, the kind that settles in the muscles and the joints and takes a long time to come out. The radio played something I didn't recognize, then something I did. I turned it up slightly and sat in the chair and looked at the familiar shapes of the office around me. The topo maps on the wall, the equipment rack by the door, 11 years' worth of accumulated gear and institutional knowledge and coffee rings on every flat surface. The place I'd come into most mornings of my adult life. It looked the same as it always had and felt completely different, the way rooms feel after something has changed, when the room doesn't know yet and you do. I thought about the report I was going to have to write, the sequence of events, the locations, the coordinates of 3 sites I was going to have nightmares about. I thought about the official explanation that was going to emerge from that report, the same way the official explanation always emerged, through the gap between what really happened and what can be written down without the person writing it losing their job or their professional standing or their mind, animal attack, exposure, misadventure, the words that fill the space where the real words would be. I thought about Fred Adams's wife Donna, who had answered the door with that look on her face. I thought about what her face was going to do tomorrow morning, and I put that away because there was nothing useful to do with it at midnight in an empty station. I thought about Fred Adams, who made elk jerky and looked the other way on permits, and had been in that country so long it should have protected him. I thought about Dale Adams, quiet and careful, the one who read the weather right. I thought about Roy Adams, 72 years old, one last deliberate footfall in the snow. I thought about Sammy Stockton, 24 years old, 8 months in, red duct tape on the left shoulder strap of his pack. I thought about the voice in the trees, and I thought about how I had not looked and I was going to keep not looking for the rest of my life, and that was going to have to be enough. My pack was leaning against the desk where I dropped it coming in. The elk jerky jar from Donna Adams's kitchen was in the front pocket, right where I'd put it Thursday afternoon. I had carried it 15 miles into the backcountry and 15 miles back out, and I had not opened it once. I looked at it for a moment, and then I looked at something else. The radio went to a commercial. I reached over and turned it back up and sat there until the commercial ended and the music came back. I was 2 fingers into the mug when someone knocked on the back door. Not loud, that was the first thing. A quiet knock, almost polite, 2 knocks, and then a pause, and then one more. Careful, patient. I sat in my chair and I looked at the back door across the room. The back door opened onto a small concrete stoop, a 4x4 slab of poured concrete with 2 steps down to the parking lot. I used it when I came in from the field because it was closer to where I parked. There was a light above the door, a motion sensor one, and it was on, which meant something was out there or had been recently. I looked at the door for a long time. I got up. Rifle was by the front entrance, which I wasn't going to get in time, so I picked up the flashlight off my desk, the same mag light I'd carried for 3 days, and I walked to the door and I looked out the narrow window beside it. The stoop was empty. Motion light still on, concrete slab, 2 steps, the edge of the parking lot beyond, my truck. The snow on the ground disturbed in a way that might have been footprints and might have been the wind moving the surface. Nothing there. I stood at the window for a good 30 seconds. Nothing moved. The parking lot was empty. The darkness past the lot was the darkness of the access road and the tree line beyond, 100 yards off, quiet and still. I opened the door. The cold hit first, the way it always does, the particular cold of a Wyoming night in late October, clean and total. I stood in the doorway and looked at the stoop and the parking lot and the edge of the darkness. Then I looked down. It was on the stoop, propped against the concrete lip of the top step, held upright by its own construction, and the construction was deliberate the way everything these past 3 days had been deliberate. The care of it. That was the thing you kept coming back to, the care. The base first. Deer leg bones, 4 of them, locked at the joints and braced against the concrete, positioned wide for stability, the hooves still attached, still intact, resting on the concrete like feet. Something had known how weight works, had thought about how to make it stand. The middle section, bones, human and animal both, interlocked and woven, a framework that shouldn't have held together but did, the long bones of forearms running horizontal, a spine, not human, arched to brace the whole structure from behind, a bear's front paw where a hand would be, the claws still on it, curled slightly inward, like it was holding something it had already let go of. What skin remained was stretched across the framework in sections, multiple skins, layered and overlapping at the seams. One piece I recognized, one piece I did not let myself look at long enough to recognize. The shoulders, something wide there, too wide, the bone structure wrong for human, wrong for any single animal, built from pieces of several things joined where they should not have joined. It stood roughly the height of a man, a little taller. The head, no jaw, the jaw was gone. The skull, and it was a human skull, was tilted slightly forward, chin down, the angle of it patient and deliberate. The eye sockets were filled with flowers. Columbine, paintbrush, the purple ones I still didn't have a name for, pressed carefully into the bone, each one placed. Someone had thought about where they would look best. 3 men, Fred Adams and Dale Adams and Roy Adams, or what they had been made into, standing on my concrete back stoop at midnight with flowers in their eyes. I stood in the doorway and I looked at it. Then I looked down at the concrete between the deer-bone feet. Written in what was on the snow, the letters large and even and patient, like whoever had written them had taken their time, had not been in any hurry at all. See you next time, Nicky. The coffee mug was still in my right hand. I'd carried it to the door without thinking. 4 fingers of whiskey, 2 of them left. I became aware of this fact as my hand opened. Not a decision, just the hand doing what it did when the world fell out from under it. And the mug hit the concrete stoop and the whiskey went sideways and the ceramic broke into 4 or 5 pieces that spun out across the concrete and disappeared into the snow. I looked at the pieces. I looked at the letters in the snow. I looked at what was propped on my stoop wearing flowers in its eye sockets, and I thought about Fred Adams at his kitchen table and Dale reading the weather and Roy's last deliberate footfall in the snow. I thought about Sammy Stockton, 8 months in, red duct tape on the left shoulder strap. I thought about a 9-year-old girl climbing a tree on a blue August afternoon while her 12-year-old brother stood at the base and didn't say a word. From somewhere out past the parking lot, past the access road, past the tree line 100 yards off, came the sound of children laughing. Keys off the desk, phone, jacket. Donna Adams's driveway was dark when I pulled in, sat there a minute looking at the house, thinking about what she was going to hear in the morning, what her face was going to do. Couldn't be the one to do it tonight, not tonight. Pulled back out and got on the highway heading south, drove 55 in a 55, radio on, volume up. Didn't touch the dial, didn't think about the stoop, didn't think about the clearing, didn't think about any of it. Around 3 in the morning, somewhere south of Pinedale, it came out of me. Not really to anyone, just out. Fuck this, I'm going to the coast. And then just drove. Well, boys and ghouls, that wraps up another terrorific tale from the vault. Poor old Fred Adams. 55 years old, 3rd generation Wyoming, knew that country better than most men know their own driveway. Homemade elk jerky, off-the-books permits, good man, bless his heart, what a tragedy. And Dale, bless his heart, quiet, careful, always read the weather right, read everything right except the thing that had already read him first. Tough break, tougher ending. And Sammy Stockton? 24 years old, 8 months in, kid had something. He really did. The wilderness agreed. Personally, from a great height. Just how we fucking love it. Hit that subscribe button. New creature features drop every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Central, and trust me, the next one's even nastier. Leave a like if you'll never look at a flower in the snow the same way again, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from tonight? Have you ever been in the backcountry when the sounds stopped making sense? Have you ever heard something in the trees that was almost a voice? Almost. I'm always hunting for the next nightmare. Until next time, kiddies, keep your fires burning and your eyes on the trees. This has been your late night creature feature. I'm Mr. Wendigo. And hey, look on the bright side. Nicky McNabb spent 11 years pulling people out of those mountains. Finally, something returned the favor, left him a little gift on the back porch. Arranged it real nice too, flowers and everything. Sure, Nicky didn't stick around to appreciate the craftsmanship, but hey, some people just don't know how to accept a present. Sweet dreams, kiddies. Sweet dreams.